Hi, I'm Kay Rossbach, and I'm in the garden.
Let's explore creative minds at the panel garden. See what blooms, see what we find at the panel garden. Comics, cartoons from old and new, nerdy papes, writers, editors, and art. Picking all their minds apart. With evil web as adorable as it gets.
So a good place to start is I like to ask people, when was there a moment for you when you had a conscious thought that was something along the lines of, okay, this is cool. I want to create a comic book. And what was that like?
I can kind of pinpoint it down to a very specific date. I had finished up a long-running Dungeons and Dragons campaign, and I was really kind of sad that I didn't have sort of situations to draw from, to actually illustrate. So like there wasn't new adventures that was going to happen. And I really was passionate about this one character, Toivo, who was the character I'd played. And then coming back from a convention, which was 4 hours away. So I was driving back home, came up with the idea with my then partner at the time, now spouse, about a webcomic that I could continue just drawing these stories from, to just like what happens after the adventures are over. How does Toivo keep going on with his like life? And so that's kind of where that moment came from, of just like, just kind of shooting the shit with my spouse, just trying to come up with something to preoccupy myself and keep that passion for this one character going.
That's amazing. So I understand you're working on this webcomic by yourself. You're doing the art and the writing.
Yeah, the only thing that is not done completely by myself is the flats, which are done by the aforementioned spouse.
Awesome.
Everything else is pretty much done by me. I have, since I'll probably be mentioning them a lot, Jay is my spouse, but they will look at the script and I will like bounce ideas off of them for like, does this sound good? Or like, I'm trying to figure out how to write this out. What do you think about this? But for the most part, yeah, it's just me, including like the web hosting and designing the website and all of the other materials that comes with like advertising yourself.
That is, that's really something. You know, I do this podcast mostly by myself these days. And it is, I guess, a comic book would be that much harder, that much more work. How do you pace yourself and keep yourself from getting burnt out?
That is a really good question, and it's something that I've had to kind of figure out how to not get burnt out. Initially, when I was first starting this comic, I was doing it as like an extra side project outside of normal working hours, which I was working a 9 to 5. And there were a couple days, well, a couple weeks once in a while where I'd fall behind on getting that comic page done because I upload weekly. It was a matter of I could not get it done in the time allotted just because it was like a complicated page, or it was something that was like, there was a lot happening in my personal life. So it was kind of one of those things that was it was the first thing to get put on the back burner if I had to drop something. But I eventually got to a point where I was passionate about the comic, where I wanted it to be in the forefront. And I eventually decided to quit my office job and make it one of the more prominent things in my life to like go freelance, but focus a lot of my time on making the comic. And that's not something that everyone can do. My spouse is the one that's like really supporting this, and they're very like, they are supportive of me doing this work to continue like making this project, because they believe in me as much as they believe in the comic, and hopefully I can make it like a viable option to
Nice.
like to make a lot of money. Not a lot of money. Comics never make a lot of money, but you know what I mean. Be able to survive.
How do you approach things like inclusion and representation in your work?
That is something that I think a lot about when I'm making a lot of new characters, especially. So if I have some other character that's coming in, how do I think about how they exist in the world? With a fantasy story, I don't want to like shoehorn in like the one-to-one problems of the world around us, right? But when I'm thinking about these characters, I'm trying to think, okay, what are the things that make them different, and how does that affect their life? I personally am part of the LGBTQ community, so that one it's easy for me to think, okay, how does this affect their life? A lot of times it just it means that most of the characters that show up are queer in some way, you know. But
that just makes them relatable.
yeah, they're all just a little queer. I'm always willing to listen if I'm doing something wrong, right? So that's one of those things where I listen to the feedback that I get from commenters about it, so I can like pivot those sort of mistakes that I make. I think it's better to try and be more inclusive in like in gender and race and sexuality, and do it wrong than to not include it at all.
Totally.
So I just try to make sure I'm listening to things, and I run by a few of my friends, like, hey, there's this character that's coming up. I'm planning on this being a thing. Is this a problem? And I try to ask those of people who are like in those groups that like that situation is about, you know?
Awesome. That's a great answer, by the way. So the art style in your comic is absolutely adorable. I love how it's sort of modern and gritty, and how when you look back at the first early versions of the comic, how you can really see like an evolution of style between then and now. Like, for example, you switched from black and white to color at one point, and it's just really cool. What's it been like to evolve as an artist publicly?
I know a lot of people when they're making a webcomic, they'll get caught up in like, oh, so long ago, I hate looking at my old pages, but I kind of think it's fun. The old pages, the especially obvious thing is like the black and white to color, but I can see a style shift as I go. And it's fun to see that progression. And I think I started the comic at a point in my art where I was pretty comfortable as it was. And I'll go back and reread sometimes just to remember what I even talked about. But there were some things in those early pages that I was really experimenting with that I'm like, oh, I should do that again. Like, there will be some weird panels that I did, and it was working at the time. But I got comfortable enough where I figured out a formula, and I'm not doing some of those like weird experimentations. And Ingress has always been kind of a vehicle for me to experiment with my art, because one of the things that I went in going like, okay, I'm just gonna go for it, and I'm not gonna like think about the art. I'm just gonna keep trucking and like make sure I'm getting it done, but like stylistically just play around, which is where you see the color coming in. Like once I figured out how to do a comic page regularly, I felt like, oh yeah, color can come in now. I have enough time to do that. And I've got a way to do it efficiently. So I think the public style evolution is just a fun thing that especially you can see in all web comics, like that shift over time. And it's just cool to see how someone can grow. And when I started it, like about 5 years ago, I think now, I felt like I was really at a place where I was a very evolved artist, not like an expert necessarily, but I've been to art school. I've been doing this for years. But even at that point, I've still evolved my art and gotten better over time. Where now I'm doing poses that I would have never even considered in that first chapter, or I'm doing like weird, I think just yesterday I made a page where I was dropping the ink all over the page to just get a weird pattern, and I've been adding in all of these like ink splatters all over on the newest pages, and it's just been a fun way to experiment. And I like to. I'm really hoping to see how I evolve even further from it.
Nice. So you draw by hand.
I do. The colors are all digital, but all of the pages are done on Bristol paper and done with a Pentel brush pen. I even do the lettering by hand just because it's one of those things that's weirdly, I get really annoyed with doing the text on the computer because it's just finicky and I want it to be placed right. And if I just do it on the page, mentally, the hurdle is not as great. So I just write it all out. Classic traditional lettering by hand, inking by hand. And I feel like that helps to evolve my style in a way that I wouldn't have gotten if I did it digitally.
That's fascinating. So, as you're thinking up these stories, where did the world building start?
The world building pretty obviously started with Dungeons and Dragons, but what I had to do, because you can't just take whole hog from Wizards of the Coast, and
Sure.
there's an amount of that you can do, but I did not want to be like beholden to like any legal things if I say wanted to go publish it in a book form or anything like that. So there were the things that I needed to change, like getting rid of the like specific names that exist in Dungeons and Dragons. It's like if you were to evolve something from a fan fiction, you got to remove the names. You got to like change all of those other things. And then it kind of evolved naturally from there. Like when I started to change like names of things and how the magic worked, like you can see the tapestry that like the background of, oh, this is from D&D, but then it starts to be its own thing, especially as I continue to move on further and further into the story. It's like, oh, the magic is very specifically around these symbols, or the characters are like they're very much their own thing, or like it's kind of one of those things that like the focus changes and shifts from the original source as time goes on, and like as I grow as a writer. And I don't mind that it came from like a very obvious source, you know, but it's one of those things where I'm trying very hard to make sure that people know it's its own thing, which, because of the prevalence and popularity of Dungeons and Dragons these days, is actually a little harder than one would hope.
So, where do your characters find their voices?
In like
sort of, I guess, in the abstract sense, you know, where do they come from? What do you make them out of?
I think like nebulously, it's kind of an inherent knowledge of like, okay, we've got our main character, like what would he do in this situation? And it's one of those things that I know he would react this way. And that's kind of where that comes from. There's characters that are harder for me to get into the mindset of, like say a villain who's like a bit manic. Like it's harder for me to get into that mindset, but I feel like the voices come from like I do a lot. I've always done a lot of like arguments in my head. Like when I was really mad at like my mom when I was a kid, I'd have like arguments in the shower of like, this is how the conversation would go. And like it would never play out that way if that actually came to fruition in real life. But I've always kind of had that like,
okay. It's like if you had all the guts in the world.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's like, oh, and then I'd say this, and she'd say that, and then I'd say this, and then it'd be this big fight. And I think that's kind of what happens in my head when I'm like thinking about these characters. I think about scenes a lot, like over and over. It's like, oh, there's this scene that's coming up that I'm really excited about. How is that going to be written? Well, this character will say this, and this other character will fight back, or these things could happen. And I think there's a lot of back and forth in my head. It's almost like a dialogue that like the characters will have with each other. Maybe unsurprisingly, I did improv, and one of the things I took from that is like the acting is reacting, and I use that a lot in my dialogue crafting and the way I write. So a lot of the dialogue kind of comes out of reacting to each other. And so the characters, when I'm scripting it out, will just be like, okay, this conversation will go on for a while, and then I have to go back and pare it down so it's not just like this big rambling thing. But I think that's where their voices come through, just like this back and forth, and then going back into that like sort of raw conversation and putting in specifics, specific like dialogue points. Like this character would use big pieces or big words, and this character is not going to use as big words, and they're going to use slang, you know, like those sort of like specific voices that each character would have.
So what makes for good comics storytelling in your view?
I think to me it's the characters. I love the characters. I know there's a lot of good stories out there that are about worlds or about like a situation, but I love a good character driven story. And that's ultimately what my comic has become. It started as like a episodic adventure, but as time has gone on, it's become more character driven, and I think I just love to see the characters interact, even if it's like interacting in a way that's a little mundane. I love the mundane interactions that are made interesting by the characters themselves. If I think about my favorite stories, the moments that I love the most are the ones where the characters are reacting to each other and like having like little mundane conversations or some like pithy joke that kind of just shows the colors of their personalities in ways that you wouldn't expect. And I think that's what really makes a work charming to me.
Do your characters ever take you in unexpected directions?
I think so. I have like a lot of upcoming storylines and plot beats planned out. I'm a bit of a pantser, so I kind of go by the seat of my pants a lot of times with like the story. So when coming up with this like initial concept, I didn't have any idea of where things were going. So the characters themselves have kind of led me into this story. There were characters that I had initially planned to be a more prominent part of the comic itself, and as I kept going, I was like, actually, no, I don't think they're going to be part of this. This character doesn't want to be here, or another like situation of like a character showing up that I hadn't expected to be part of the comic. There were moments that like I would bring in a character and they were just going to be a little like one-off character that was there for a minute and would never show up again. And now he's come back 2 or 3 times and is going to continue to be a major part of the story, because he's having those sort of interactions that I love, but he's been involving himself in the story in ways that I wasn't like necessarily prepared for or expecting to happen. So yeah, I think the characters kind of like have led the story in ways that I wasn't prepared for. And I think that when you go into making a comic without any real plan beyond the first chapter, that's bound to happen.
Right on. So, one thing I'm noticing about your artwork is I love the emotional depth of the expressions of these characters. Was that hard to master?
I feel like that was something I focused on so early on in my art that it's just been a sort of a natural thing that I've developed. I have some sketchbooks from early high school where I'll look in them and it's just the same character over and over again, but with different expressions. Or like I would do just pages of anime eyes, like having these like various expressions to them. So it might be obvious with the like emphasis I put on like acting as reacting and the character interactions being the major part of what I like, but the emotions and the expressions go really in hand with that. So the character acting that happens is a really important part to expressing a lot of those sort of like emotions and those like in-depth conversations that these characters might have. So I spend a lot of time focusing on how to get the emotions right. To me, the like expressions become second nature, and they've often changed from thumbnail to page, where like an frown might soften a little bit to get the tone of the panel right, or a grin might get bigger to make someone look a little bit more like conniving or sly, and it's fun to see those evolutions from thumbnail to page. So I think when developing my art, the emotions have almost always been in the forefront. Emotions and hands. Just two things that I just love to draw.
A lot of artists find hands challenging.
I love drawing hands so much. It's like obnoxious sometimes, because I'll look at a page and I'll be like, okay, how many hands are in this page? And it'll be like as many hands as there are panels, or there will be a panel that's just entirely hands and there's 5 hands on the panel, and I'm like, why did I do this?
Have you ever done an entire page of hands?
I don't think so, but now I want to. I have done I just did a page where a character is talking about like someone else's scar, and the scar is on a hand, so the hand is in the background of the panel, and then I put all these scars on people's hands, which becomes a plot point, and that makes me have to draw more hands. But I love to draw hands, so it's fine.
Nice. That is really cool. How about horses? The other thing artists hate drawing is horses.
I've never drawn a horse. If I drew a horse, it would probably have hands. I made a monster that looks kind of like a dog horse, and I did give it human hands.
Nice.
Just because I was like, oh, what's the creepiest way to make this monster like horrible? Human hands, probably.
Do you have a favorite monster you've come up with?
I think my favorite monster is the one with the human hands. The thing that's come up like a plot point that I did not expect to have happen, but eventually did come out, was that there are these beasts that have kind of infected the world. And one of the main villains can turn himself into one of these beasts, but so that's like a really kind of horrific transformation that you can see on the page. But he keeps his weird gangly hands and it's horrible to look at, and I love that.
Do you have a favorite comic book of all time?
Yes. I would say my favorite one is probably Ranma 1/2, but I have a really big soft spot for Full Metal Alchemist.
Nice.
Big fan of the mangoes. But I also did read recently Middle West, which I think is published by Dark Horse Comics, which has fantastic art in it and is like fantasy Midwest. And it's just like gorgeous. So if you have not looked at that one, I highly recommend it just for the art. And it's a fun story.
Nice. So when you read comics, are you paper or digital?
I prefer paper, but I will read digital comics just fine. I just like, I don't like to look at screens too much because it really kind of hurts my eyes after a while, but that's part of why I do comics traditionally. So I prefer paper. Also, I just like the way that printed page looks.
What was the first comic that made you cry?
I don't. I'm not much of a crier. So I feel like it must have been something when I was like a teenager. It might be Full Metal Alchemist. I bet that one probably made me cry. I don't read a lot of like really emotional comics. I love a good comedy. But Full Metal Alchemist has some pretty like intense scenes in it.
Awesome. Is there anybody that strikes you as either the most underrated or inspiring creator in comics?
To me, one of the most inspiring creators is Rumiko Takahashi. She has such a large work, like it's like an encyclopedia of work, and it's a huge body of it, and I just think the variety of stories is really fascinating, ranging from like gag-a-day comics to horror to like fun adventure romps to pretty much anything in between. So she's always been kind of one of my big inspirations. I wouldn't necessarily say she's underrated. I feel like she's pretty well known at this point, but she would probably be one of my biggest inspirations.
Awesome. Well, Kay, we are up against the end of the show. Are you ready for the fun part?
I maybe.
These are the interesting, wacky questions that I sort of mix in like with really deep stuff. So
all right,
it's going to be fun. Okay, so let's start with an easy one. Which Ninja Turtle do you see yourself as?
If I knew the Ninja Turtles, I would have a better answer, but I'm going to go with I'm going to say Michelangelo. Is that a turtle?
Yeah.
And I'm going to say that just because I think Michelangelo is an angry gay artist, and so am I.
Perfect. That works out. Awesome. So, if you had a Batman-style utility belt, but it was made with items that are relevant to your life, what would be in it?
There'd be like 25 pens of different types. Um, there would be an entire box of Kleenex, always ready to go. I just I use a lot of Kleenex. um, there would be just a utility knife to like open boxes and stuff, and chapstick. I think chapstick would also be there.
That's essential. You have to
Yeah.
have that. So, what inspires you?
I think music is one of the big things. I get inspired a lot by music. I was one of those kids who would make the like the music videos with characters in my head when I was like listening to an album, and I still do that. And my spouse, I think Jay, is a big inspiration.
Awesome.
And I think, honestly, like other web comics and other comics in general are pretty inspiring. When I find a good one, I'm like, yes, this is what I want to be doing.
Awesome. Do you have a set of criteria that you look for in a minion or a sidekick?
My own, or like a character just in general?
I was thinking for you, if you needed a minion or a sidekick, what would you look for?
Probably someone who has decent music taste, or
Nice.
or compatible music taste. I'm not going to say like any music taste is bad, but like we should be compatible in our music tastes. Someone who will bring me snacks,
Snacks are important.
and someone who is just ready to do what I ask, no questions.
Nice. Loyalty.
Yeah. some loyalty. Really, I've just described marriage.
That's true. So, where do you find joy?
Well, again, my spouse. But we have a cat who is, her name is Chitter with a CH, not an SH. She's very talkative, but she's got a lot of personality, and she brings me a lot of joy just because she's got a lot of personality. And like I spend a lot of time playing video games, but I get a lot of joy just from creating art and making.
So, congratulations, you've defeated Thanos. You now have in your possession the Infinity Gauntlet. It gives you the ability to change or modify any aspect of reality on a whim. You've probably got a huge list, but what's the first thing you would do with it?
I mean, if I am, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna keep it for a while. Like then I can cover all of like the really like the things that I want to solve in the world and universe later. So I'll, for my selfish first thing, like I would, man, I might just get like a really good meal, like a bowl full of ravioli. I love ravioli. So like make myself hungry so that it tastes really good and have like the most delicious ravioli bowl in front of me. That might be the first thing I do. I feel like you gotta do something really like almost lame to start, to just get your feet in the water. Like
Get yourself warmed up.
yeah, snap your fingers. You've got a bowl of ravioli and you're hungry. See if it works. It worked. Now I've got all this ravioli and I'm pretty happy. Let's go change the world now.
So what's next for Kay Rossbach?
Well, continue the comic. I am going to be, one of my goals is to really up the marketing and strategy aspect of the webcomic life. But I think developing my art, getting myself out there, and making some other side projects, like some side stories or backstories, and getting those comics made. See how much I can make without completely burning myself out in the long term.
Well, Kay, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to talk to me on my humble little podcast. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it was fun to talk with you and be on your podcast. I appreciate the conversation.
So much fun. So, where can people find you online?
You can read my comic at ingresscomic.com, ingress-comic.com. Either one works. It both goes to the same place. You can read Ingress Adventuring Company on Webtoons and Tapas, and can find me on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok if you so choose, with the username KAYARTICS, so KAYARTICS.
And now it's time to go. Wasn't that fun? The Panel Garden is a show about the things we love. It's produced and hosted by the adorable Eva Webb. Opening theme by Antonia Marquis and Tyler Scott. Closing theme by Mikey Flash of Speed Force Music. The credits are read by the awesome and talented Kat Bertano. That's me. And if you're feeling super generous, feel free to go to buymeacoffee.com/EvaIsAdorable. There, you can support what we do by chipping in as little as $1. Not financially able? That's okay. Shares on social media and reviews on your favorite podcast listening platforms help us a ton. And that's it, babies. That's all we got. Thank you for being awesome, valid, and perfectly gorgeous. We couldn't do this show without the love and support of the amazing people who listen. That's you. Join us next time for another death-defying adventure in cyberspace. Bye!